Greetings, we have a Tal Meteor greater speed build here, crushing down the Comet rune, going to help us clear the Greateress in an amazing amount of time. We have new items, Mempo, Twilight, Smoldering Core, new multipliers coming in, interactions to unveil with the Tal set as well, so super excited. Let's dive in. So taking a look at the revised Tal set here, the biggest changes are actually with the 4-piece. We're now getting 100% resistance per stack. That's up from 25% previous patch and 50% from the PTR. So this is still a massive increase to toughness, which is going to maybe not allow us to just breeze through the rift without toughness items, but it lets us keep our Squirt's necklace bonus a lot more readily, which I thoroughly enjoy. The other mod here that is massive is attacking with Meteor reduces the cooldown of teleport by 1 second. This build historically has had massive trouble getting through the rift, insanely slow, especially for a speed build, but this mod is what's going to allow us to traverse the rift rather readily. The 2-piece bonus, the auto-procced meteors, are actually counting as attacks toward reducing the cooldown of teleport as well. So you can imagine it's more like if you've ever played the Messerschmitt's Reaver builds where you're continually killing enemies and resetting your cooldowns. That's sort of what it feels like now, which is pretty great. It means we don't have to slot cooldown to be able to go through the rift. We're not relying on illusionists to proc so that we can get through the rift either. And it also solves another problem because we can place more attack speed in the build. The two-hander setup doesn't feel terrible. It's still a slow attack, but it's like bearable. It's like pretty good. It's like, on the edge of, being okay. So I'm pretty happy that this allows more of a focus on attack speed. It synergizes better with having to stack up your Smoldering Core stacks as well. So very happy with this 4-piece change. Also a change with the 2-piece. Sort of sad to see. So you have the auto-procced meteors. This only occurs if the wizard has meteor on their action bar. So before, when we were playing like Tal or other Tal Nephilim rifting builds, we would always have that side benefit of being able to just slap on the Nilfur's boots and benefit a little bit from a meteor multiplier. Well, that's no more, unfortunately. So just keep that in mind if you're putting together a different build or something like that, right? So I mentioned the items were very divisive, very contained. It makes you feel when you're putting together this sort of build like you don't have a lot of options. So we have the Grand Vizier, a 2-hander. It does give resource cost reduction, which is great because we don't have APOC in the build. We also have the Smoldering Core. Lesser enemies are lured to impact areas. That doesn't really matter as much, but meteors deal increased damage to consecutive hits on the same target. This stacks up to 10 times. So it's a debuff multiplier, and you have to stack it multiple times on targets for it to have great effect. This is why when we're targeting these greater speeds, it's going to be a little bit slower clear, closer in, to 3+ minutes. Mempo is the new item upon patch live. Meteor Shower Rune is now applied to all cast meteors and deals multiplier damage, but this only applies to your manually cast meteors. So we have a big focus here with going back to our origins of just manually casting meteors, and that feels great. That being said, though, it's not like the 2-piece is not doing any damage because the 2-piece has its ICD removed, and you're able to more readily just proc the different elements, send off volleys of meteors. It's still doing a significant amount of damage in this particular build, and there are side benefits for the 2-piece meteors in certain cases as well. So going back through the items, you can see here the Smoldering Core requiring you to hit targets multiple times kind of discourages Star Pact a little bit because it would be difficult to refill your arcane power bar. Mempo being a helmet sort of discourages Archon because it shares a slot with Swami. So that's, it makes it more difficult to gear with the Tal build, but prevents Archon from being a thing as readily. Then we also have, as aforementioned, the 4-piece encouraging attack speed because you're able to slot more attack speed. It means it's easier to use the Smoldering Core, and it discourages using Death Wish, because before what I was looking to do was run Death Wish with an offhand, and that would allow like an extra multiplier or new configuration of items and gear aside from the Death Wish. But with the Smoldering Core, it does encourage a more of a spammy playstyle rather than just channeling and casting every now and again, right? So Death Wish is discouraged, Star Pact is discouraged, Archon is discouraged. So these are all great things despite it feeling very limited. So let's take a look at our skills and the elements that they represent. You have to slot particular skills with particular elements to be able to benefit from all 4 elements in the build. And we are running Meteor Comet. So this is the Comet Meteor. The cold rune is going to chill and freeze enemies. And this is great because it means you can benefit from your trapped multiplier at range. Now, the build itself isn't particularly a range build, but because we include the Stone of Vengeance in the setup, if an Oculus Ring, for example, were to spawn out at range, you could still benefit from that greatly by repositioning and still benefit from trapped at that range, which is quite nice. Do note that the chill will apply before the damage instance, so even the first meteor that's hitting a target or re-chilling a target will benefit from trapped at range. This is also the cold rune of our elemental configuration here. Now, it might look a little weird because in past patches, certain skills were not allowed to proc the Tal 4-piece and the Tal 6-piece, one of these including the Storm Armor. We also have the Familiar and the Ice Armor. If there is a rune that deals damage on those abilities, it can now proc both the 6-piece and the 4-piece. I double checked the 4-piece just to make sure. But it also means because we have so much higher emphasis on toughness related to the 4-piece, it's going to be more important to maintain those. So the elemental configuration here is pretty important as well. Now, Storm Armor itself is required because we are using Halo of Carini for toughness. Again, zapping enemies at range or just making sure this is up is going to be important throughout the Rift. We're also using other abilities, Sparkflint Familiar, and we're also using Calamity on the teleport for the Arcane. Calamity is proccing your 4-piece and 6-piece rather readily, and the 2-piece as well. So the 2-piece helps proc your 4-piece meteor resets instantly when you deal calamity damage on an enemy, which reduces the cooldown on your teleports quicker. Just auto procs 1 extra, second reduction means you move through the rift quicker. On top of that, Sparkflint just means that you have a better configuration of uptime for both your 4-piece and your 6-piece because you're both keeping your arcane and fire bonuses up rather readily. This alternate slot we placed Prism. With the Prism, it's going to be helping to protect your squirts and giving extra resource management. And I'll go over that in the resource section later on. I tested both the Diamond Skin Prism Elemental Exposure configuration and the Absolute Zero with the Astral Presence, and while Absolute Zero was really close at an average of like 3.6 minutes, the Prism with Elemental Exposure was more consistent, produced 3.4 minute clears on average, which was pretty nice. Just mentioning this because later in the guide you might see me talking with the Absolute Zero. Rest assured the affixes and everything that I'm talking about are the same except for those 2 skills. Attack speed in this build is managed via affixes on the weapon, both rings, the gloves, chest piece, Enchantress's Focused Mind, and Paragon. This gets you all the way up to a paltry 1.69 attacks per second, but for this build it is a very nice breakpoint to be at. That's going to be the 34 frame casts with Meteor. Notably, you have to have perfected attack speed to hit this breakpoint, so if you're missing a few percentage points, you'll probably be at 35, and then if you opt to drop an entire affix, which you can do for increased toughness, I'll go over those options later, that will get you all the way up to the 36 frame, so a little bit slower in that regard, but still a decent breakpoint to be at. So the reason you don't want to go any higher than this, and I found this out the hard way through testing, is that you cannot sustain the resource with this build. Unlike almost every other wizard build, we don't have the option for a source, and we're not wearing a wizard's hat, so we don't have the option for arcane power on crit to help maintain our arcane power. So we have to use other means in the build to account for resource. This means stats like flat reductions via either Prism or Power of the Storm are going to be huge because those are subtracted after your RCR is gone into the calculation. So we have the 50% thankfully from the Grand Vizier to start with. Having additional RCR is very good as well, but not as impactful as it might be because of this huge 50% value. So it is notable, but so we will go with the topaz on the helmet, one affix on the shoulder piece, and on the quad gloves at higher paragons. Even at lower paragons, I would probably still place the RCR. It just makes the build a little bit more stable. And then if we click over to Prism, you can see the effect that the Prism has, if we're including it, can reduce the cost of Meteor significantly, and over the total rotation can be fairly impactful, even though we have very little cooldown reduction in this build, and Prism is a base 15-second cooldown. You can just line it up with your arcane rotation so that when you're prepping for you're spamming for your cold convention of elements, you can just soak up all of that and be able to gain maximum benefit out of your DPS rotation is the play, in my opinion. So with the Prism, you have the option to either get rid of a resource cost reduction roll, be it the one on the helmet or the gloves to fit in more toughness, or you could slot a different passive. Since you don't necessarily need the astral presence, you could go either blur for more toughness or elemental exposure, as I've chosen here, going to give us 5% per stack multiplicative, and you can readily stack 3 of these, so it's at least 16% multiplier that you're going to get via the cold stack on the meteor, arcane from the teleport, and fire from basically the staff is going to apply into density rather readily. The only stack that might not apply is going to be the lightning, but this is nice because it increases the base DPS of this particular setup. As far as gameplay is concerned with this build, you're going to want to favor being in melee range near your primary targets, so yellows, blues, whatever it is. Oftentimes the Comet Rune ground effect, when stacked on top of itself, will be so bright and white that it completely hides the Enchantress's Oculus Ring spawn. So this is a problem, and sometimes it's just better to default to close range when you cannot see the outline perfectly. You can use the shielding from Prism to protect your squirt's bonus a little bit more readily, allow you to spam your meteors to greater effect. Remember that our meteors do freeze enemies, so this provides a lot of innate crowd control, but it also means that you're going to CC reduce monsters rather quickly because of the short duration on the freeze. So that's just something to keep in mind. If an Oculus Ring spawn does pop up, you can jump in at range rather readily and not have to worry so much about your Audacity bonus, which is one of the neat things with this setup. It's so flexible in that regard, and the fact that your meteors are coming down in an arrangement related to the meteor shower rune is kind of cool. It means, like, if you're missing your target, you don't have to be pixel perfect on your cursor, basically. However, you do have to account for the delay in the meteors coming down. It takes them, I think, 1.25 seconds to land, to auto-proc from your 2-piece and reduce your cooldown further. So before our cold rotation, you're going to want to stack your Smoldering Core bonus. So to really gain max benefit from the cold convention of elements rotation, you're going to want to start attacking well before like the arcane to start stacking up this, and then when cold hits, you decimate the elite. So that's the idea. It's going to be more of a slow clear rather than a quick clearing build, but it works very effectively. So balancing toughness with this build was very interesting. The increased 4-piece that are making all resistance a little bit more beneficial. So it's something to take into consideration. So you, for example, instead of before where we would want to get armor on the belts, armor on the Nilfurs, we can actually keep the default affixes of all resistance rolls in this case, which is quite nice. So good. It means it's going to be so much easier to get both of these pieces properly rolled. In tuning the toughness, I went for the approach here that we're going to try our best to keep up the squirts bonus through most mob types. So there were some extremes where like hell witches, ice porcupines, like very aggressive electrified elites were popping the squirts if you were not careful. But there are some intricacies here, especially with slotting the esoteric alteration. This is going to increase our non-physical damage reduction. So cold fire, lightning, poison, and arcane. And the interesting thing about this is that it makes secondary physical resistances and melee damage reduction very appealing, because if you want to create a balance of toughness, those are the specific affixes you'll want to get on secondaries to improve your melee reduction. So as you can see here, melee reduction from attacks, and then on other pieces, just physical resistance to help mitigate that as well. Because of the placement of squirts, even though we don't have the Guardian's 2-piece, there is still a large benefit to having both int and vitality on your gear. For example, on the two-hander here, even at 2k paragons, I was still opting to go int vit on the weapon instead of damage percent, because the increase from damage percent was relatively lower than gaining this amount of toughness through the vitality. It's something like 18% toughness that you're gaining from that amount of vitality versus gaining only like around 10%, I guess, DPS increase. So little things like this are going to be taken advantage of. We are subbing a lot of Paragon into vitality, placing Vite gems, but we don't want to overstack vitality either to where resistance or armor become more beneficial. So it's kind of difficult to tune and find the right values, but I'm confident this level of toughness here should provide you a comfortable clear while still having a lot of offensive value. And one of the big reasons we're going for so much vitality, so much life percentage, even though we have to place the Topaz in the helm, life percentage affixes are going to be extremely important for this build. We want to increase the value of our shields so that we can preserve the squirts bonus. That means the galvanizing ward that absorbs and refreshes once only every 5 seconds. It's going to be protected by our deflection, which is going to sit on top. After we perform our attacks, it's going to refresh this 4% consistently. And unfortunately for resource, we have to go deflection because a really nice rune on magic weapon here would have been conduit, which has a similar effect to arcane power on crit. But alas, we have to slot deflection for toughness here, or just to get that shielding stack recovery. If you're running the Prism build, you'll also get a 40% shield for 3 seconds on a slow rotation, which is greatly helpful for restacking your squirts, preventing squirts from being broken if you're under duress. This is also a use case for the Prism. Or even though this build can benefit from area damage, I found a better value to just focus on squirts uptime, in my opinion. So this is just my personal choice. I went vitality on the shoulder piece, life percent. We do have a weird mixture of affixes on the chest piece. The armor here is more valuable, assuming you are subbing vitality like you should be. Notably, I already mentioned the all resistance, life percentage there, armor on the pants as well, and then all resistance, vitality on the Nilfurs, vitality on the bracers as well. And even though you have option for vitality on the helm, the additive damage is a little bit more advantageous. This is where I've opted for offense rather than toughness. Remember, I opted for defense on the weapons, so this just helps balance that out. One thing that is notable about D3planner currently is it doesn't track the 4 and 6 piece in regards to the new skills properly yet. So I'm expecting this to be fixed in the future, but as you can see here, only 2 stacks on our primary build. But if I go to a build where I've manually subbed in skills that could previously stack these, you can then see the full value. So if you are looking for a tankier setup, I would first of all opt for the vitality on the weapon. That's the first thing I would do. Secondarily, you could look into placing vitality on the helmet in place of meteor damage. Third, just equipping blur instead of EE is a great option defensively. You could place int instead of the attack speed breakpoint there. Just drop 2 breakpoints, you'd be fine. Or you could also drop the elemental damage here for int, just to increase your base int. And a lot of these options indeed are what we were going to go for in the low Paragon setup, and you'll see that here. Low Paragon build is rather unique, and I'm looking at a sheet for 1200 Paragon here. Interestingly enough, we're placing diamonds in the chest piece and pants because we're using non-ancient items and we don't have a lot of int at these lower Paragons, and the value of all resistance has increased by the set. It actually extends the value rather of your all resistance and gear. So this is pretty cool. You are going to want to seek out possibly life percentage on rings. It's going to be difficult to get crit rings at these early stages, but life percent as an affix is super valuable for toughness, especially in comparison to just a non-ancient ring that only has 500 int on it. Still better. Another thing I haven't mentioned is the Sanctified Power itself. Since we don't make use of the orb or the magic missile here, we are running the storm armor power on the items. So I don't know how this performs, but I expect this will allow us to have a little bit better damage against the Rift Guardian in the very least. Perhaps if we are singling out elites, we'll get lucky with our storm armor procs and be able to clear them a little bit faster. So maybe a few seconds faster in the Rift from this Sanctified Power, which would be very nice. So I did not mention the Enchantress, nor have I really looked into the Enchantress on this sheet that much, so please excuse if it is not perfected yet. I will have the updated D3planner available, but one of the things I think you're going to want to do is include the Guardian's 3-piece for the increased strength, dexterity, intelligence, and vitality affixes. So this would allow you to give your follower a lot more toughness, and you might even go as far as augmenting either int or vitality or something to this effect to give your follower even more toughness. Now the augments don't get increased by the Guardian set, only the gems and gear and the base affixes do, so that is also notable. But this would allow you to run the gains access to all skills, giving you both the second life passive and the attack speed, and all of these other goodies such as slight increase to toughness, extra elemental damage, cooldown, all good things, right? The one regret I have with this follower setup is that you don't really have room for the Creed's Flame because you now need the Ring of Royal Grandeur for the Guardian. So if you want to try out the Creed's Flame, which would give you extra resource, since we are resource hungry in this setup, that's something you can try testing out. Anyways, thank you for watching, and do have a good time in season.